Hello, hello to everyone out there in beta world, wherever it is, whenever it is for you. Good now. Today on our show, I am Ryan Erickson, as you may well know, or not, depending on how many of these episodes you have seen, with Red 42 consulting firm of great import here in the universe and Earth. I am so pleased to be here with a couple friends today. One new friend, one friend from here in the past few years, to talk about the story, the superhero origin story of one of the, I would say, a seminal figure in organizational development, Mr. Bill Pasmore. And with that tease of talking about the frontiers of organizational development, I have here Niels Flagging. Hello. And our guest today, Bill Pasmore.
Wonderful to have you in this show, Bill.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you guys. Looking forward to it.
The backdrop is that Paul Tolchinsky, whom we talked with a couple of weeks ago, he said, "Yeah, why don't you talk to Bill about this?" And we thought, yeah. Now is the time to talk to the luminaries in the field.
Good. Well, I always listen to Paul, so it's good that you do as well. Yep.
Well, the invitation first here is as the tune that was called for today. Niels came in with a great idea to kind of go chronologically through your writings and Paul, Bill. My God, you're talking about Paul and Niels. And then I thought before, give our audience an idea of who you are, where you came from, and how you came to be in this field, and what has led you through to where you are now.
Okay. So as with many people, I think the decision to choose this as a particular profession was not one that I anticipated. It was something that came to me rather than something that I was pursuing intentionally. And just to start at the beginning, I was born into a big family, and for whatever reasons, I was a very good student in a very small school, and so that got me starting to think about wanting an education and going further than anyone in my family had been able to do. And so I was interested in furthering myself, and at the same time, we were not well off, and many of my friends went on to work on assembly lines or in other hourly paid jobs, where at the time, back in the 1970s, when I was making my choices about what to do, there was a lot of attention to the plight of the worker and the fact that people were living lives that weren't very fulfilling, and that organizations were paying them, and that was the contract. You'll come and do what we tell you to do because we're paying you, and that people pretty much had to just accept that. But there were on the horizon, examples of organizations that today we know as high performance organizations, designed using principles from the socio-technical school that we'll talk about here this morning, that were different, and that really did offer people a chance to have fulfilling work and contribute their ideas and thoughts to how the operations should be run. And that seemed to me important. Like there was an intersection between my interests in trying to do something that was going to contribute to the world, and the needs that a lot of people I grew up with had to have life be better than it was for them. So I fell into this line of work after being an undergraduate at Purdue in management and aeronautical engineering. I liked to fly. I was a pilot. I enjoyed the idea of perhaps becoming a pilot and having an airline career. That was one option.
Oh,
And the other
didn't know
route
that.
was,
Okay,
what's
you
that?
were a pilot. You were a pilot.
Yes, just a private pilot. Never got to the commercial stage, but I was a private pilot, and I enjoyed flying, and I thought maybe that could be a career for me. And then management was my other major, because my family at one point had gotten into a business that it ran, And I said, well, that's also a route I could follow. And when I ended my undergraduate years, I was totally lost, not sure which direction I should go, not thinking I wanted a corporate life, but not sure what else I could do. And I went to a professor in our field. His name was Don King, and asked him some advice, not because I wanted to be in the field, but because he was one of the more approachable professors I had had in my undergraduate years. And he said, well, come into our doctoral program. And I said, what's that? He described it. And I said, oh, that sounds really interesting, but I can't afford it. And he said, well, we'll pay for it. And I said, okay, then.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what he saw in me. I took his class and enjoyed it, but I just must have caught him at the right moment. So he invited me into the doctoral program, which I did, and discovered Paul Tolchinsky there as a colleague and a lifelong colleague, as it turns out, at that point. And I was in a class with another student by the name of Rijon Lipschitz, who went on to teach in Israel. And we were in Don King's course, which was a seminar on various topics in organization development. There was a whole list of topics. And Don said to us, choose one of these topics, start reading in it, get familiar with it, and then be prepared to write a paper and present that. And one of the topics on the list was socio-technical systems. And I had no idea what it was, and neither did Rijon. And Rijon turned to me and he said, do you know what that is? And I said, no. And he said, neither do I. Do you want to work on it together? I said, sure. And so we started reading. And when I discovered that it had something to do with the workplace and trying to do something to create opportunities for people to influence their lives and the workplace and make it more productive and better for them, it spoke to me, and it just seemed like a great fit. And then Don had this project at General Foods where Paul worked in doing a plant conversion from a very traditional leadership style to a high performance, high commitment, socio-technically designed plant. And it was in the General Foods system, which was famous for Topeka and some of the early experimentation that occurred in all of industry around this. And what a great opportunity to learn by going into that organization and doing my research there that eventually turned into a dissertation. But that's also where Paul and I met Eric Trist, who came there as a consultant to advise General Foods on the redesign of that facility. And I can remember, so vividly sitting in meetings with Eric, and there were leaders in the plant who'd been busy on the redesign work who didn't understand who Eric was. And they would be explaining to Eric how they were going about designing the plant using these socio-technical principles. And, I marveled at Eric sitting there and smiling and being so polite and just listening to them talk, and not, correcting them or imposing, his authority on them or saying, I'm the guy who wrote that stuff and made all of it possible, and after the meeting, I asked Eric, well, what's it like to sit there while people are explaining your theories to you? And he said, I think it's wonderful. The fact that people care and are using it is enough for me. And he was such a gracious man. That's what I remember about him. And how he was able to partner with Fred Emery, I don't know. They were about as different as you could possibly get. Fred was bombastic and wanted credit for things and was never given the credit he deserved, and did such beautiful, wonderful theoretical thinking. But Eric often attracted the attention and received the invitations from people to do work because he was such a delightful person.
Yes.
And I took that lesson from him and said, I think I'd rather be Eric and try to be, helpful to people and gracious rather than push my way to the top. So that's the origin story. And from there, I went to Case Western Reserve because it was a place that practiced organization development and did a lot of T group training, which I hadn't been exposed to at Purdue, but I wanted to be exposed to it. And I wanted to join NTL, the National Training Labs at the time, and learn how to do that interpersonal work and combine that in some way with the work that I was doing in my organizational research, because it felt really meaningful and personal to me that we should know each other, and we should know ourselves at a much deeper level to become more effective than we are. And I wanted to master that craft, and Case was big on that. And so I said, okay, off to Cleveland for a year, learn all that stuff, and then find myself a real job. And 20 years later, I discovered I was still at Case, and met such wonderful colleagues over the years as Frank Barrett, who we talked about as a student, who became a faculty member at the Naval Postgraduate School and then Harvard, but was a marvelous jazz player. And my teaching colleagues, David Cooperrider and Ron Fry, were my closest colleagues, and Suresh Srivastava and Don Wolf and Eric Nielsen and David Kolb and Richard Boyatzis. You know, it was quite a star-packed group there at Case, and it was a marvelous program with great students. But 20 years in, you know, was a long time to live in Cleveland, and I was just anxious to see if I could live elsewhere, although I'd been to sabbaticals in Europe and to Stanford and enjoyed those tremendously. It was time to redirect myself and challenge myself to do something new. And I wound up, after my sabbatical, living in Maine and writing a book that we're going to talk about, deciding to join a consulting firm run by David Nadler. That was a small-ish firm. I think at the time I joined about 40 consultants. But what was fascinating about it was that his work was all at the top of the house. It was all CEOs and boards.
Yes.
And often major transformation projects. And again, great colleagues and great clients. And, you know, the work that Delta did, you know, was featured in the Wall Street Journal, even though the firm didn't often get credit, but you would see lots of things that we did show up there. And I learned so much from David and those people about what it's like to consult at the top of the house, and did succession planning for CEOs at Walmart and Pepsi and Dow and Mass Mutual and other places, and did transformational work with Unilever and other companies, and just had a ball there for a few years. I was there 10 years altogether, but David sold the firm about 5 years in to Marsh McLennan, Mercer, Oliver Wyman. We became affiliated with them, and I discovered no part of life in a big consulting firm. And,
is that maybe, can I interrupt you, Bill?
Sure.
Because now you made me aware maybe of a shift in times, if I remember well, from what Paul told us about this engagement at the General Foods plant.
Yes.
Apparently the consulting client were mid-level managers, like functional, whatever, managers who wanted to improve operations. And then a decade or two on, you had this opportunity to work with CEOs. I think that might have been a shift in times as well, right? That happened there.
Yes, it was a shift in times, and definitely a shift in focus, and, you know, a new skill set for me, which was what I was looking for at the time, you know, continued growth. And by then also,
and consulting became an industry, right? In that period, consulting
yes,
became a real industry.
That's true, and continues to grow in its, you know, scope and scale.
Yes, not in quality,
but not in quality. No, we can agree on that. We can agree on that. But back then, you know, sociotech was big for a while, and then quality came in and kind of displaced it, because for a lot of reasons we don't need to get into.
It's very interesting.
And that was
I love
part
that.
of the shift for me.
I love that topic. I think that's the opportunity of speaking to people like you and Paul with a bit more, you know, historical, how to say, more
context.
More context, more historical perspective yet. I mean, I've been in the field for 20 years already, but you might have 40 or so. So that's
I discovered that I'm coming up on 50 years of working, so that tells me something.
Yeah. And it's worth mentioning maybe at this stage that you have been a scholar, an academic for all this time, and a consultant at least since the 80s, I think, 80s and 90s.
Yeah, I started teaching in 76 at Case, so that gives you some idea. And I've been mostly a professor throughout my career, but the 10 years that I spent at Delta were pure consulting work. For that period of time, no teaching going on then. And then for 2 years after that, I had joined the Center for Creative Leadership to help create a practice in which we helped people at the top of organizations continue to learn. That was my focus. It was not consulting per se, but it was a lot like consulting because, CCL is an educational not-for-profit with a mission of, developing leadership for the benefit of society worldwide. And my job with that was to take seriously the idea that people could continue to learn throughout their lives, even in senior executive positions. And how could we help them to do that? And so that was the work that I was doing for CCL. And I had joined CCL full time. I was not teaching. That was my career. And then 2 years after I got there, Warner Burke from Columbia called and said, we're starting this new executive program in change leadership, and we're looking for a young practitioner scholar. Do you know anybody? And I said, other than the young part, I know somebody. and I was able to negotiate with the center to stay at the center and continue to do the work I was doing there and join Columbia and become a professor of practice, which I still do today. So that was 15 years ago that I joined the center, and 13 years ago that I joined Columbia, and I've been doing both of those things since.
We had a little bit of collaboration in those activities around organizational development at CCL, Center for Creative Leadership. But let's jump back in time. Is that okay?
Sure. Let's go.
I find this a fascinating topic. When the new wave comes, like quality or lean or then agile, the previous waves, in this case, socio-technical systems, it gets kind of erased, substituted, and nobody remembers it anymore. Is that
right?
As well?
That's true.
Which is, we cannot construct anything in OD or in management sciences or in organizational sciences or organizational knowledge. Is that just my perception? Am I too pessimistic, or is that your perception?
The question is, can we not
build anything? We seem to forget everything after a while.
Can we not increment? Can we not do increment and integrate?
Can we not increment to synthesize some of this? It's interesting, after quality came along, and then re-engineering, and then lean and agile, there were people still who kept the flame alive, like Mike Beer, with his work on high performance systems. That was at least in some cases popular. So it wasn't that the field entirely went away, but there were times in the period of the 80s in particular, I think, now this is going back, where there was something called the Ecology of Work. Yes, that book. The Ecology of Work conferences were held, and people were talking about that work and socio-technical design and high performance systems. And the conferences would have literally 2,000 people. And they would be union people, and they would be scholars, and they'd all be together mixing it up and talking about, the latest innovations. And, I can remember being a part of that, presenting at those events, because my other professor and longtime colleague after graduating from Purdue, Jack Sherwood, and I were doing public workshops on socio-technical systems to teach people how to do this work. And it's complicated work. The book that you're holding in your hand on designing effective organizations was trying to take a lot of what was mystical and difficult for people to read and to find, because it was in working papers by the Tavistock Institute that Eric had been a part of, and Fred Emery, and together they did some just incredible work and wrote some books like Organizational Choice that were so influential in the field, but just really difficult to read and access.
Yes.
And I was, interested in having an influence over how leaders thought about things and the application of these ideas. I've always been interested in change and trying to make things better from an applied perspective as well as a scholarly perspective. I've tried to live on that edge. Yeah. And so designing effective organizations was an attempt to take the doctrine of socio-technical systems and what we knew about it and put it into a book that people could access and talk about it at conferences and workshops and popularize it. And I thought we had an influence on the field, and that book was a better seller than I thought it would be.
Ah, okay. How much did it sell?
when I wrote it.
Any idea how many copies it might have sold? Any idea?
I know, I don't really know. I'm sure it's less than 10,000.
Okay,
You know,
but still, it's very
not
readable.
hundreds of thousands. Never made a lot of money from it, but it was more than I would have anticipated, because I would have guessed like 5.
Yes,
Well-
and it's very interesting what you mentioned as well, that the work of the Tavistock Institute, or the STS movement, Socio-Technical Systems movement, wasn't as well published as it is now. Now there are these thick Tavistock volumes, the 3 volumes, very well edited, I think, and
Yes.
easily available. But this is much more readable. Here, your tone is much less academic in this book. I love that. Anything you would like to add on this book? What about the time? 1988, I think. Is the year of
Yeah,
it.
well, it was, you know, the things we were teaching people in the workshops and so forth were just not captured and made readily available for people who wanted to apply this theory in their organizations. And so the people who were reading it were practitioners who wanted to be able to bring this into their organizations. And although I didn't know it at the time, I was foreshadowing in that book. There's a chapter there on non-routine work, we called it,
Yes,
which
following
was
work.
about professional work, and the idea that some of these concepts could be potentially extended into the professions where people were doing knowledge work and you know, creative work and innovative work, as opposed to routine factory work. And you know, how might we think about doing that? And it was an interesting idea, and I was starting to pursue it. And then a person by the name of Cal Pava, which some of our listeners will know, who taught at Harvard, wrote a book called Managing New Office Technology or something like that, which had nothing to do with what the book was about. It was a terrible title, but it was all about, you know, sociotech and non-routine settings, which, you know, was about knowledge work. And he did a masterful job of helping us understand that, you know, to think about work in the knowledge professions was to think about the processes by which we know things and eventually apply our knowledge. And he called that work deliberations, to distinguish it from meetings, in which we often focus on people getting together around a table and talking as the focus, right? How do we improve meetings? And he was thinking, no, how do we improve knowledge processes in organizations, and looking at how you gather knowledge and process knowledge and make sense of knowledge and apply that to improving things. And you know, I found that just fascinating work, and went down that road for a while, and did interesting work to me in research and development organizations and so forth with those ideas. And unfortunately, Cal passed away at a very early age. Just a tragedy.
I remember, Bill, you told me the first time I heard his name, Cal Pava, was, you told me about him at the Columbia Club in New York City. You told me about him, and of course I looked him up. Brilliant work. Decades ahead of his time, in a way.
Decades ahead.
Yeah. Could we jump to the 1990s?
Sure.
Because this, I must say, is a book that changed my mind again about you when I finally ordered it and read it. You wrote it in Maine during your sabbatical?
Yes.
Also, if I do not know, but I think it's probably your first book in which you shine as an author. The prose is so beautiful.
Thank
so
you.
refined, so you just read it and you know what a marvelous person this William A. Pasmore must be. It's beautifully written. Tell us a little bit about that, because this is when, like, socio-technical systems movement had already been replaced in a way in the public eye by quality. I suppose, right?
Yes.
Maybe
Yes.
by re-engineering. This was 1994, I think. So what was your intent at the time to write this book?
Yeah.
And
Well,
why the sabbatical, maybe?
Sure. It was definitely being in Maine and on sabbatical was a reframing and a chance to, you know, I went with the intention of writing something that would be influential and important, that wasn't just another article or a book that I would produce, but something that would have an impact. And you know, the issue that still, I think, is with us today and has been written about extensively by others now, is how do we create organizations that are capable of adapting at the pace of change that we're experiencing? And ultimately, that's what I wanted to write about was, what does it take for organizations to do that? And, I wanted so much to put a book out about organization design because that had been something I'd focused on, and organizational flexibility, designing for flexibility, that kind of focus.
Yes.
And, one of the things that I always regret is that the editor of the Wiley's series that's a part of said, we can't call it Designing for Flexibility. There was this great successful title by Noel Tichy called Creating Strategic Something. And he said, we're going to call this Creating Strategic Change because that'll it'll be similar to what Tichy wrote in terms of the title, and people will be attracted to that and they'll buy more copies of it. And if I had been able to name it what I wanted to name it, I think it would have been a much more popular book than it turned out to be, just because I don't think people understood what it was about from the title.
Yes. So you would say it is more about creating the high performance organization than about creating change, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think the later books we'll talk about focus more on change than this one does. This one is more about how you design organizations for, the kind of world that we're living in today. And, those were very early thoughts about all of that back then.
Yes.
But I did have this notion that there was something about the need for organizations to be able to know what was going on in them and adapt that. And how do you do that? How do you get both the organization to have some sense of what was going on throughout the organization and be able to bring that knowledge, to critical decisions about organization design that would allow the organization to function differently than it does.
Yes.
And I still today, after all these years, Niels,
40 years old.
Today
40
am
years
troubled by what gets in the way of leaders understanding the need to do this.
Yes.
And lock in.
I have to highlight that. Bill, this book is kind of 40 years old by now. It doesn't read like that, I must say. And I took a look at it today again, of course, and what came, of course, it's obvious from the book, if you look at it into it, that it makes this distinction between what we call alpha and beta, command and control organizations, flexible, decentralized, adaptive, high performing. On the other side, you describe the distinctions very well in the book, I would say, but nothing happened. Zero happened. This is called Frontiers of Organizational Development, a little bit as a topic. I mean, we are not slaves to the topic, but isn't it frustrating? I sometimes feel frustrated reading that. I mean, looking into Mary Parker Follett's book, even, or Marvin Weisbord's, or many others who have written about Kurt Lewin, even.
So I know that you and Ryan have really devoted yourselves to trying to get this message across to leaders in organizations, and you've taken a really strong stance, which I admire on that, to be out there. And to raise this question of what's going on and why aren't we hearing this message?
Yes.
And I have to say, I'm as frustrated as you are that over all these years with all these brilliant people doing all of this work, people who are scholars in this field and practitioners in this field and know the benefit of doing things in a different way, have not been able to convince the majority of leaders that they should even consider it. And so there's something obviously that's deeply ingrained in the psyche of leaders, of people who are attracted to positions of power and authority, and want to take on the responsibility of running organizations, that either is not attractive about creating adaptable organizations, flexible, high performance, employee empowered organizations. There's something that's either terribly unattractive about that or something really frightening.
Ryan, you want to say something?
Oh,
Because
well, oh my gosh, the mantra, whatever is it, we talk about the command and control. And we talk about
Yes.
that's there, and I think who's in command and who's in control, and that and who's the commander and who's being controlled. That it's a fundamental shift that I think it breaks the brains of folks. Like if I'm not in command and in control, well, who is, and how do I trust them? You know, and to me, it's that inculcated through the education and again, to no one's fault, really. You know, you might argue about whose fault it is that the education comes into it, the managerialism, that it is heroic to be a manager and to be in control and to be a leader. What does it mean to be a leader? Is that you're in control and you have, you know, this command authority, and that's not the way what we're talking about in the socio-technical systems domain. We're not really talking about that kind of control. At least what I get, and Niels, we could totally disagree on this, but
I do
it's
sometimes.
about, well, of course sometimes, but it's in the space between people, and it's at this power width thing versus what we've trained to feel and be is the power over command.
Okay.
I command, I'm in control.
So, Ryan, if I understand correctly, what you say that it's not just leaders who are at fault; it's all of us who still have this power over command control mindset deeply ingrained. I would like to offer.
Could there be? I think it's the blindness. There's blindness to there being another way.
I would disagree. As
Please
we
do.
try to do, even if we. If it's so boring to always agree, right? So I try to disagree a little. I think as much as I like your hypothesis, Bill, that leaders are part of the problem, I like it. I think they are part of the problem. Of course, we are all part of the problem, as Ryan just elaborated. But I think that, you know, what bothers me about your book and other great books, you know, and so many others, it's not the book. The book is perfect, right? What bothers me is you got so close to the truth, still nobody's hearing it. And I wonder if we haven't gotten it wrong. Still, I think we are still getting it wrong. If I look at Gary Hamel's work today, who arguably is the most widely published, read author on this kind of stuff at this point, it's not convincing. He's not making the case. Your book is much better, by the way, than all of his recent books. Much better. This book is gold, I think, compared to those. That's a personal opinion, not a fact.
Thank you.
Each of you judge for yourselves. But I think you got very close to the truth in this book. The message isn't heard, you said. But I think it's also that, let's imagine somebody read this book and understood it 40 years ago. I think the mystery that wasn't solved back then, and the same goes for Edward Deming's work, for example, which I admire. And I always think, everything is there in his books, everything. Maybe not everything, because he didn't explain the organizational development parts of the stuff so well, like as you did, for example, I think. So, but there were still missing pieces. Nobody could take it. It couldn't be taken. It could be believed, but you couldn't. There were still missing pieces in the puzzle. What do you think about that hypothesis, Bill? Maybe we are part of the problem, and the lack of method is also part of it.
Yeah, there's no doubt that we're part of the problem because we haven't succeeded in communicating it in a way that, you know, most people can accept it and pick it up and run with it. Now, of course, there are exceptional leaders who have, and when they do, you know, they become converts and advocates for this way of thinking and
Yes.
being, and, you know, they stand out among their peers. They write books about this from their perspective, and they say, I discovered, you know, that this is actually possible, and I want to tell the rest of you, you know, as one of you, you know, I'm able to think this way and work this way, and the success that followed was incredible, you know, and I just as one of you want to be able to tell you that you're missing this and you should be, you know, paying attention to it. And I'm thinking, you know, if they can't get the word out, then what more can we do?
Yeah, so much wasted
that would have
opportunity.
influence.
So much
Missed opportunity.
I also thought, I mean, we had this conversion at CCL, Center of Creative Leadership from the United States, and I always wondered, they do these wonderful resource swallowing programs for companies.
Yes.
And do they tackle philosophy? I often wondered. I know that you did. You do it in your work. I saw it live happening in Brussels, for example. So I know that you tackle the philosophy. But I wonder, do these other people tackle philosophy, or do they just tackle individual psychology stuff?
Yeah, I think the major focus is on self-awareness and better interpersonal skills, because that's the foundation for, caring about other human beings. That we are not alone in terms of our existence on the planet. There really are other people who we affect in our lives, and
we need to be more sociologists and philosophers, I think, in our work. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I think that that could be helpful.
Bill, I had to come in on that point specifically because you talked in one of the webinars you did that I watched, that you talked about the MBTI and the Strengths Finder, and that it's so fun and great to know about who we are as individuals. And that the key to all of this collaboration, this problem of collaboration, is that I just don't know how you are and how you see yourself and view yourself. But that you mentioned that is very interesting. That's a distraction. That might not even be probably in most cases isn't the real problem of why it is difficult for us to be together and see together. And it's about wants and needs less so than it is about how I've constructed my psychology,
Yeah, that's so true, Ryan. I mean, I have to admit that I was really in love with the T group experience and was a part of that for many years with NTL. And I thought I saw breakthroughs in people in terms of their ability to know themselves and know how they affected others. And I thought that was really important stuff.
NTL
And
is
so,
the Tavistock related socio-technical systems stuff. You were
yes.
part of that in the 70s or 80s?
Yes. That was the other half of Tavistock, of course.
Yes. The American
the Bion and Miller and others who led the work on group dynamics.
And that became an industry in itself, right?
Yes, that's right. Tavistock Lab and so forth became an industry in itself. Just awareness about how we relate to other people and why we do that the way we do.
And that declined into mindfulness, as another friend and colleague of yours, Ron Purser, called it.
Yes. Ron was a student and great thinker, one of the most brilliant thinkers that I ever had the honor to work with.
We will try to have a conversation with him as well.
Yes, you should. You should. But yeah, all of that, Ryan, to your point, no matter how effective our interpersonal relations are and our understanding of ourselves and our skills in working with others, no matter how finely honed those tools are, they don't deal with the issues that people have around the executive table that we have to find a way to deal with in organizations to be successful as leaders in collaborating together.
Yes.
And that's the part that, the interpersonal work didn't address those things. And if you ask people, well, why aren't you collaborating? And, eventually, people will get to the truth of it, which is, we're fighting for power and authority and trying to understand who's going to, get what they want done here. And I have a commitment to my goals. I have a commitment to my people. I need to make sure that we win. And, I'm making it sound worse than it is, but that's what's propelling some of this in organizations that unless we can talk about what's really happening and how we change those dynamics, then we're against each other instead of with each other. And there again have been organizations that have overcome that, where teams have been able to have those honest conversations and they've overcome the differences in the politics and been able to reach incredible heights working together in a collaborative fashion that they didn't know was possible. And wow, do we cheer for those people. And I cheer for leaders who do these things well. And I just wish that somehow I could reach more of them. And that's my fault, not theirs.
Yes.
But I will say, just to mention, Niels, that I back to Eric Trist, my colleague Stu Winby, who was at HP and then has since retired, but continued to work in the field of socio-technical systems and been a voice for that, was with Eric towards the end of his life because Eric lived close by to him in California, in Pebble Beach. And he said that Eric, virtually on his deathbed, said, I've been a failure. I haven't reached people. They haven't listened to the message. And Stu was trying to say, don't you realize how important your work has been in the world? And Stu did work on sociotech at HP with factory after factory, and his Factory of the Futures work. I mean, 20, 30 factories that he converted, and it was incredible work with incredible impact. And yet Eric felt like we're talking about, like I could have somehow been able to do more. So I think of us feel that way.
I think that our failure is not so much in our failure collectively, if I may include us in the whole thing.
Yes, please.
Like Eric, Chris, and Kotlevin and everybody.
Those who seek to educate in the realm of organizational change.
Yes,
that's the us we're talking about. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The broader field. I sometimes wonder if we haven't failed to establish the institutions that would be needed to create the shift from, let's say, organizational authoritarianism, command and control, to organizational democracy, sense and respond, however you call it. So I think this, and you describe this well in this book, I think this dichotomy between command and control and the other model that we should aspire to, alpha and beta, as we call them. But Eric Trist called them, or maybe Fred Emery called them, operating system 1, operating system 2, or something like that. So it's all, it is nothing new, this distinction, but we have
nothing new.
Seriously. You cannot install democracy on top of authoritarianism or fascism. It's impossible. So I think we have to create institutions, the magazines, the business schools, or the we have to create the institutions to promote this.
To legitimize the body of knowledge.
What do you think of that, Bill? I always wonder why you do not have the institute, the big institute that's doing this kind of. I mean, you could do you could do it all,
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because you think about the Tavistock Institute and its role over many years of in the field, positioned to do exactly this, right?
Yes.
And always struggling for funding and for what are we going to do to continue the existence of the Institute. And as you know, the original studies that were done in the coal mines that led to all of this discovery that, yes, there is a different way of working, and it actually works, and it's better than the way we normally work. And let's tell the world about that.
The early Toyota.
After the clear data and success of the research, was all rejected by the British Coal Board. No, we don't want to operate that way. So, the funding was cut off, and on they went to do other things at Tavistock. But I think that you're right about needing more institutions, needing a group that is capable of standing up and doing it. And for a while, I thought we had that with the Ecology of Work and the Socio-Technical Systems Roundtable, and which still exists. But it's interesting that it probably needs to be rethought and looked at again, because it's time for a rebirth, perhaps, of some of those
the
ideas.
rest of the industry has moved on. I mean, the CCLs have moved on, the business schools have moved on, and with vengeance. They have totally changed their faces, and not for the greater good, one might argue, as many have argued, like Henry Mintzberg and so on. Ron Purser, of course, is a
yes, he's written some great stuff lately, hasn't he?
His critique on the business school is it's like the guillotine of writing. It
is.
Oh my God! But your scholarly work also wants to be acknowledged. I brought one of your books. I think there are more, right? 2 or 3 volumes of this.
I'm just looking on the shelf. I'm not sure. I think I stopped editing at volume like 22 or something like that.
Oh my goodness! Okay, and I only have one here.
Deborah Newmare and Rami Shani took over, and now have been joined by Danielle Kotze and Zandi, and it's volume 27 or 28, I think now.
I have volume 13 here in my hands.
Okay.
So you have been doing this editing.
Well, I did edit that for a long time with Dick Woodman, my dear colleague, again from Purdue, back to the Purdue days, but who was the person who suggested that we do that, and got the original publisher, JAI, to buy in to creating that series. And it's an interesting story. In the first volume that we created, Research in Organizational Change and Development, we had the original Appreciative Inquiry paper by David Cooperrider, on that topic. And then we had an article by Chris Argyris on kind of his views of the field of organization development, one of our great founding fathers of the field.
Yes.
And we presented the book at the Academy of Management meetings the year after it was published. And Chris pulled us aside, Dick and myself, and said, guys, you have to realize there aren't enough people doing research in OD to put out a second volume of this. The first volume is all there's ever going to be. And so you should really not try to produce a series, because it's, who else are you going to get to write?
He said there is nobody else. That's it. He said, that's it.
That's it. That volume 1 had all the great work that would ever be published in OD.
Oh, why did he say so? What do you think?
Because he didn't see people doing research in our field. He was like having the conversation we're having. Like, there's no future in OD. There's no research going on. Nobody cares about it. And so, why would you try to write edit a series of books on this? There won't be any good thinking to put into them. And here we are, 27 volumes later.
Exactly, you disagreed. So what is your thought on management research, organizational research, OD research more specifically?
Well, it's been up and down over the years. It's been consistent, though. There are always people who are contributing new ideas and thoughts that we thought, this is the end. There aren't going to be any more papers. There were years when there weren't a lot of papers to publish.
The end of history.
Wringing our hands, saying, where are we going to get the papers to put out a volume? And we had to be creative about that. But since then, it seems like there's been a fairly steady stream. And again, if you look through that series of volumes, there's such good thinking there. David Coughlin, who you may know, wrote a paper recently where he went back and reviewed everything that was ever written in all those all of those volumes in the series, and extracted the main themes and ideas and said, here's what we know about the field. And it was impressive to see what he was able to pull from that. And I don't think the field is going to die anytime soon. That's my sense, because the challenges are still there that we faced back in the time that Eric Trist and Fred Emery were crawling around coal mines. We still have those same challenges that we're confronting.
Yes.
And we haven't figured out how to solve them yet. So to your point, maybe an institute, maybe better channels of communication, but different training for leaders. I've always thought, where is the business school, the university, just one that's willing to train students in what you guys talk about? Where is that place?
I also wonder, again, I was more hopeful 5 or 7 years ago when I also taught at several business schools, but my hope has faded since then.
Well,
we have to create it.
You have to create it. Niels, you have to create it. There you go.
Yes. Yeah, maybe you live in New York, where the posh people live. Do you still live in New York, or do you?
I still live in New York.
So,
but I'm not one of those posh people.
No, but you live nearby. I remember you lived in the neighborhood, so.
Yeah, you're still in the neighborhood.
But we have to. I think that's one of the major flaws. I think not you, not I. The major flaws in our field is we are not very good at creating unity.
Perhaps not.
Not good.
But my colleague, David Cooper Ryder would say, let's focus on the things that we have done and the things that are working and try to amplify those. And there's been a lot that's been done well over the years. We have so much research, so many great examples. Obviously, somebody's listening, because so much has been done. Yes. And it's a matter of how come it's just not catching on. That's the challenge, because so many good things have happened.
Maybe again, this is coming at it from, my background was not an academic. My 25 years or whatever has been in practice, and now coming into dabbling in with the academic folks. And it seems as if the whole field of OD, right, and stuff, OD, organizational effectiveness, all this stuff, it is, and when you say OD, you immediately think about the HR tower, and that there's a ceiling to that domain of knowledge, and that it's not necessarily deeply integrated into the executive kind of education. It seems to me, just from the outside looking in, and that maybe what you're both kind of calling for is more of an integration of the socio-technical view and the behavioral, interactional sociological view, and that, but that is, how do you invite that into a program? What's in it for the program? What is in it for that, other than you have produced a class of top management and executives who actually care about the people who they're serving? So I
Yeah,
don't
no,
know.
maybe I didn't express myself well, but Bill, when you said that we do not see the business school out there that's keen on being coherent with the kind of message we are talking about. And then I jumped in and said, yes, we have to create it. We have to create institutions around that. What I think is that we should be able by now to, because I think I totally agree with you, Bill. We have much more insight, much more methodological knowledge than 30, 40 years ago. I sometimes like to compare this when Edward Deming did his work. You must have seen that happening live, unfolding live. He didn't have a great change methodology or approach. He had nothing, apparently. He had, personally, I think we would talk about consulting right now, so this moves into that. So he had some kind of good sense of how consulting work should be done, personally, but he couldn't multiply it, he couldn't scale it, he couldn't help organizations transform de facto, I think. I've reflected on Deming a little bit more because I read all his stuff recently and edited this book of quotes. So I think we now have more capable, more powerful change approaches, like Open Space Beta, if I may mention that. So we have different and more capable, more powerful change approaches. We have more insight about those kind of organizations. We have the Toyota case and Handelsbanken and Gore and many, many others, DM Drogeriemarkt in Germany. So we know a bit more. Our knowledge is more consolidated. We have more research, more insight around psychology, organizational psychology, philosophy, systems theory. So we should be more capable, more able today to create different institutions, I think, if we pull together, of course.
Yes, of course. Yes, well, perhaps it's time. You know, there have always been places that people who seek enlightenment have gone.
Yes.
Because they want something that's
Yes.
different than the status quo, right? And maybe it was the trips to Ojai in California to learn Est, or maybe it was NTL as people went to Mecca to learn something about human relations, or to Tavistock, or to other institutions where they could pick this up, or the Ecology of Work conferences. There's always been, you know, people who are interested in not just following the herd and trying to find enlightenment.
Yes.
And those are the people that, you know, whenever we encounter them in our work, we just so enjoy spending time with them and seeing what's possible.
Yeah.
And not worrying about these constraints. And boy, isn't that wonderful.
Yeah. And I'm not hopeless at all, but I think a little bit earlier you touched upon this, that there are whole industries out there promoting command and control.
Yes.
The consulting industry, the training industry, the consulting industry, the academic, the business schools and so on, they are very powerful. They have their magazines, their professors.
Yes.
All of it, right? So I think we have to create those counter institutions. It's like I once read an article somewhere, maybe in The Economist, about how the far right in the United States is currently building institutions to consolidate their power, or to build it, which is of course not a good example. It's not something good, but it is a good example that shows that you have to build institutions to institutionalize ideas as well. And the command and control management movement has done that over the last 100 years. And
yes,
the
right.
Folletian, the Taylorists have done it, the Folletians haven't. So
yeah.
that's good.
Well, just to mention David Cooperrider again, you know, his efforts on behalf of making the world a better place, you know, created, you know, his energy created business as an agent of world benefit that has had, you know, hundreds of CEOs join. The Dalai Lama and Jimmy Carter, you know, others luminaries took part in that. And
Yes.
you know, certainly you have to say there are people who are willing to join and be a part of something like that. You know, so it can be done, but even that you have to stand back and say, has it influenced the majority of other executives to think along those lines
Yes.
and act along those lines. Well, you can't have everything, but you got to start somewhere.
I think you have done a wonderful job. Now, another book that I brought with me here is you wrote a couple of books. I have two here about consultants and how they should work, which is very interesting for an OD scholar and practitioner to write about how to do better consulting. Can you tell us a little bit more about this book, maybe in particular?
Yeah, well, that one
I think
I did at the time that I was with Delta, that featured a lot of the thinking about the kind of ways in which we did our work at Delta that I was exposed to and learned from David Nadler and others at Delta who worked in that that mode at the top of the house. And you would think that working at the top of the house requires that you're just a brilliant business strategist, or that you understand finance at a deeper level than anybody else in the world, and that you speak businessese and all of that. And there are people who do those things and work at the top of the house, but our work on organizational transformation and how do you successfully build and have an executive team that really works together effectively, and how do you handle acquisitions and mergers in ways that they actually work instead of fail, had a lot more to do with the relationship that you could establish with the CEO and with the direct reports of the CEO in terms of their trust in you and what you were doing on their behalf, as opposed to them, like they were experiencing from a lot of other consultancies. And I'm working with an organization now that's going through a McKinsey experiment with a big analysis and so forth. And some of the senior executives I speak to there are not happy about what's going on. Don't trust the process or the outcomes to be good for the organization. And yet, they're nervous about speaking up, because this is something you're not supposed to speak negatively about. This is, something you should always accept because it's McKinsey and they're great, right? So
yes, they're doing so much analysis. It must be good, right? There's a colleague of mine here from Austria, Ernst Weichselbaum. He says that as a consultant, this is very interesting for us as consultants. He says all analysis of the present is futile for the work. It is even counterproductive, which is a way beyond what Ed Schein preached decades ago, right? So the idea that you do not have to evaluate the status quo, make a gap analysis, that's all flawed, because it will lead you to incremental change. You should not analyze anything. You should do fact finding, and that should be it. I think that's very much your approach as well.
Yeah, I would support that. But I think the work that we did that was the most important work, where we had the greatest influence in terms of critical decisions that executives and their teams made, and the kinds of changes that they brought about in the organization as a result, were the conversations that we had when you went into the office and sat down, and they said, "Oh, before you sit down, would you mind closing the door?" And when they say that, that there's a conversation coming up that's going to be meaningful and worthwhile, and where they really sincerely are thinking through some things that they want a partner to think with. And they can't necessarily think through these things with the board, because the board is in evaluative mode, or has an opinion about whether they should go left or right that they may or may not agree with. And so, where do they go for the kind of conversations they need to have about what kind of executive do I want to be? What kind of change do I want to lead? Is the change I'm leading enough? Is it incremental? Do I need to do more? These conversations are not easy ones for people they sleep. They lose sleep over, these kinds of questions. And then they discover that even with their teams, they can't really have these conversations, because the team is looking to them to, have an opinion and lead them. And so those conversations, don't happen unless there's a lot of trust.
True. I would even argue that in alpha organization, it's unlikely to have a good conversation.
Yes, it's unlikely to have a good conversation, right? And hence CEO turnover and all of that. So this book was about relationships that enable that kind of transformation to take place, and that how do you build that trust, and what do executives expect from people that they're working with to deliver in terms of the support for their success. And
I
are we
would say
really focused on that?
it's a book filled with nuggets for consultants who take their OD consultants who take their work seriously. So I think
Yes.
it's highly
And
recommended.
credit to Ron Carucci on that, and to all of the Delta colleagues who were so good at that. Yeah, for sure.
This is more recent.
That's a little more recent. It's starting to feel like it's
Yes.
been a while.
We're starting to get here into our time. This is when you published it 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
I think it's older than that. I think it's now getting to be 8 or 9 years, right? What's it say?
Didn't we already know each other at the time? Weren't we acquainted? 2015.
Yeah, there you go. So 9 years is coming up.
Oh my goodness. We've known each
goodness.
other for a long time, I think. Because I remember when we met, you were working on it.
Yes, so there you go.
This is called Leading Continuous Change, Navigating Churn. This is very pop in the real world.
Yeah.
What's behind that book? What drove you to
So
very beautiful? Beautiful.
Fortunately, it's now outdated. We're not experiencing change anymore, so I'm not sure anybody needs to read it, right?
Nothing's changing.
Nothing's changing now. We've solved that problem, and we can move on to whatever's next. Yeah. But what inspired that book was actually I attended a conference in New York and John Cotter was speaking about his change model, his 8-step model, which is a nice model everybody knows, linear and designed to manage a change, right? Yes. And he was speaking at the conference and pointing out that with the pace of change that we're experiencing and the fact that it's getting more complex and there are more changes happening simultaneously, that he was worried that his change model wasn't going to do it anymore. And it just wasn't going to be adequate for what leaders were having to deal with. And he was lost about, how to recommend to them going about dealing with the kinds of rates of change and complexity of change that the world was entering into. And that fascinated me. And I said, well, he's right. And it has to be a whole new paradigm. We can't continue to come at change in the way that we've come at it historically, as if change is only happening one change at a time. And as if, it happens in nice, neat, linear steps. That is not the world we're living in. And so we have to back away from that world and imagine a new way of dealing with that complexity, using ideas that, Margaret Wheatley wrote about in the New Leadership Science and so forth, and other authors who were thinking about chaos and how do you manage and live through chaos and see order in that and make decisions that can help you survive in a world where there's that kind of whitewater. And so that's what promoted that book. Cotter did come out with his book later, by the way, that was his answer to that, called Accelerate, and says, do my model faster.
Yeah, exactly. Which I really appreciate that work. But,
which is another approach. But I was trying to take a different paradigm, a different view.
Yes. What it kind of saddens me to hear that Cotter at the time said, he was lost because it reminded me of another book of another author. Maybe you know him personally, Marvin Weisbord, Productive Workplace. Yes. Probably know the guy, right?
Yes, I do.
You probably know everybody from the field.
Well, I bumped into them at one time or another, probably.
Oh, one time or another. Okay, I can manage it. Because in Productive Workplaces, Marvin Weisbord does a brilliant job in describing, we went through different stages of OD work, experts doing the improving the process, later experts improving the system. The future inevitably would be everybody working the system together. And I think you are getting much closer to this. Our work is totally infested by that thought. Everybody now has to work the system together. So you do not need consultants. You just need to have something like masters of ceremonies. Change agents, flawed idea. Warren Bennis, I love you, but that's not. You probably know Warren Bennis personally as well, I suppose.
Yeah, I did. And I thought his article on the failure of democracy was one of the classics ever written in our field. And then, he had to apologize later and say, I don't know what happened to democracy. It's gone. And, a funny thing happened on the way to the future as he became president of the University of Cincinnati and discovered that, no, that doesn't work. So
the kind of democracy model didn't work. Yeah. Okay.
The democracy model wasn't working.
His democracy model was a bit too baseline democracy.
Yeah. But I love Marv's book on productive workplaces. I think it's one of the classics of all time, and it just reflects so much on his deep background of not just being one of us in the field, but he started out as in the family business and running it, so that he learned as a leader from doing it firsthand that the old way doesn't work and it can be done a different way. And then he was a believer and never an academic, but always, a strong writer and thinker and creator of things. And, the whole idea of getting everybody in the room and working on things together, although it had been something that the Emerys and others had invented far earlier in the socio-technical movement, Marv really took that on and grew it in a way that other people could grasp it, and it popularized it and created again a community around it of people who were in the future search, right?
I mean, Ryan is part of the open, Ryan is part of the open space community, so that's I think it's the most brilliant approach to bringing
and it's marvelous work that he did in that, and it's again demonstrations of what's possible.
How do you look 9 years on? How do you look at what you wrote in this book?
I think it's still timely and needed, and as we are approaching the age of AI, people better wake up because change is going to happen in a way that we have never experienced it before in terms of the pace and the impact on so many people's lives and work, and it's going to happen so quickly. And unfortunately, many people are taking the stance that it's not clear how this is going to play out, and therefore we'll wait and see, before we decide how we're going to respond. And it's like, no, it's already here, and you either will respond or you'll be caught up in like the tsunami, the tornado, whatever the
permanent whitewater.
The permanent whitewater, whatever that is, that's coming your way. And people are saying we really need to think back in the socio-technical paradigm about AI and its influence on all of us in our lives and society in the future. And it is a socio-technical phenomena again. And how are we going to lead and manage that in a way that it's beneficial for all of us instead of destructive?
Yes.
And it could be potentially quite destructive if not managed well. The experts say, I'm not an expert, but it's, to me, that makes the kinds of skills that are described in that book more important for people to understand. That discovering what's going on out there is such an important part of an executive's life. And yet, not enough take the time to explore their world and understand what's happening around them and then make good choices about what to do.
Yes.
The choice making part is really hard. Obviously, nobody's good at prioritizing. None of us are. But it was my editor I have to give credit to for the suggestion that I write about going down the buffet line and piling food onto your plate. And when you get to the end, you realize there's way more than I can eat because I haven't prioritized or been selective at all about, what I think I should have for lunch. And we continue to see that as organizations overload themselves with too much change that's not critical. And, it winds up impeding our progress rather than facilitating it. And so the skills that we write about there are still need to be learned and taught and adopted by more folks.
Yeah. You told me ahead of this session that you now teach a doctoral class on impact of digital transformation and AI on OD. Is that true?
Yes, I've taught a course on the future of organizations and the future of work before, but this time we really slanted it towards AI. and because I knew it was coming and I hadn't read enough about it. So I was interested in getting more up to speed. And we had some brilliant speakers come in and share with us, what they're working on at the cutting edge. And now I feel up to date and definitely as a result behind.
Now, but I have to turn to another subtopic
Okay.
now, which is, I think this is your latest book, is it?
Yes, I think. Well, that's one of the. No, it's not the latest, but it's one.
It is not. Which one is the latest?
The one that just came out is about digital transformation that I wrote with some colleagues from CCL. But it's.
We do not count that. We do not count that.
Today, no, don't count that.
Today, this is your.
Yeah, that's
called Advanced Consulting. Earning trust at the highest level. And this is called Frontiers of Organizational Development. This is kind of the topic that we chose. And of course, a writer, the confident and experienced and versed writer like you, academic, practitioner, all of it, you probably sense that there is a frontier here in this topic, right? So what do you think is why the urgency? Why the book?
As you pointed out earlier in this conversation, the consulting industry is growing like mad. And a lot of organizations are turning to consultants to help them think about strategy and the future of how the organization should be designed and other things that leaders used to think about more themselves, but are turning to consultancies because of their expertise and the fact that we've cut back on labor and even at the executive ranks, and we don't have the power, the sheer horsepower available to do some really deep thinking about things. And so we're turning to consultancies who do that kind of thing, and are able to bring expertise from their work in multiple organizations and across industries to bear on organizational issues. And I have to say that despite some feelings that we have about the McKinseys and the Deloittes and the Ernst & Youngs of the world, my daughters work for Deloitte and Ernst & Young, full disclosure. It's not that I'm opposed to them at all. That they have a purpose to serve in the world, these large organizations, and they are helping executives think beyond what they would currently know or be able to create on their own if they just sat around the executive table. That would be my biggest fear in any organization, is that an executive team sat around the table with just each other and tried to, imagine the future and think about what they should do about it without ever exposing themselves somehow to, knowledge and information that's out there about what's going on, and therefore, what their organization needs to do. So I credit the consultancies with bringing the perspective of what's going on in the world out there. And what I would like them to do differently than they do today is move away from the expert mode of, as you said, coming in, doing lots of diagnosis on the status quo, doing a gap analysis between the current and where they think the organization needs to be. And then, delivering a report on what needs to be fixed in the organization, and then saying, and we can fix that for you. And going about trying to do the work that, we would have people in the organization help us to do, because they need to understand it and own it if the organization is going to operate successfully based upon all of that change going forward, right? The people who are living there and left behind have to somehow make it happen and make it work. And the more that they understand and own that and are committed to its success, the more likely the organization is to benefit and thrive from that. And, the latest data that I've seen, although it's not reputable and the research isn't good, says that our success in change is still not very good, that most major change efforts fall short of their goals, and whether it's the improvements that we are seeking or the costs or the time. And I think a lot of it has to do with, we still are trying to help consultants learn how to do their work in a way that it has the kind of influence and impact that we would hope that it would help the organizations that they serve be more successful in the long run, because they have, what we used to call help them learn how to learn, right? That's what we used to say the consultant's role was when we started OD, was it's not my job to do this for you, come in and fix it for you. It's my job to teach you how to fix it so that you can learn how to learn. And as you encounter additional issues or challenges, you'll know what to do. You'll know how to pull people together. You'll know how to get their input. You'll know how to help them figure out how to act on that, the training that they need to do new things, all of that, you'll be able to manage that for yourselves. And in the cutback of, the cost-cutting efforts that all organizations seem to go through, they limit themselves to the point where there is no slack resource anymore to do that. And so they hire consultancies to come in and do all of that work for them, which is a good thing from the perspective of bringing new perspectives, but a bad thing from the perspective of a sustainable change. And
if the new perspective you bring in has a built-in bias towards self-survival and wanting to have more finders and minders and grinders, doing the work of the junior consultants years and years and years into the future, as opposed to actually saying, okay, now this is what we've shown you that you are now capable of doing, and we're going to step back as consultants and say, now this is your show, as opposed to now we have a delivery group on the ground for years and years and years to continue to just pepper you along. So
Yes.
Be careful. Be careful the fox you invite into the hen house. I think that's.
Yeah, I think we have to help organizations and leaders in organizations understand that, the point that you just made, Brian, that along with the good work that these consultancies can do for you, they also do have a goal, which is to grow and to continue to work for you and continue to have assignments in your organization. And I don't know if it's intentional or not, but at least in some cases, the work that they do, particularly around cost reduction and so forth, leaves organizations less capable of independently changing themselves, because now we have to rely more on you consultants to come in and do what we no longer have people who are capable of doing internally. So we put ourselves in a dependent mode.
Yeah, very well put, Bill. I when you started speaking about the large consulting firms, I thought probably the industrialization of consulting is a natural byproduct of the command and control model of organizing, because the more you have command and control inside an organization, the less you can use the existing expertise, the dumber the organization gets, and the more likely it becomes depending on external experts, quackery, fashionable trainings, methods, tools, and so on that need to be promoted from the outside. Because internally, they cannot get anything done. They do not have good discourse. They do not have dissent sufficiently to generate anything by themselves. So maybe what we see, the fierce industrialization of the consulting industry, is a natural byproduct of alpha organization, and there's no simple overcoming it. I think you are suggesting to practice another kind of consulting that would be perfect for beta organizations that want to become beta.
Yes, I think that's right. And I would just go back to the organization that I mentioned, where the executives are struggling with the analysis that's getting done.
Yes.
And just ask executives to think about that. Pay attention to their intuition, pay attention to what they're experiencing. And if you have executives, members of the executive team who are not feeling good about the consulting that's getting done in the organization, why is that? Shouldn't they feel good about what's happening? Shouldn't they say, this is wonderful, we're learning so much about our organization, we're seeing so many opportunities to make things better that we wouldn't have uncovered ourselves. It's such a great partnership that we're working with these people, and they're helping us to improve so quickly in ways that we couldn't even have imagined. It's so fantastic having these people here as our partners. Isn't that the way they're supposed to feel? and if they're not feeling that way, shouldn't they be paying attention to that and not feel nervous about saying something? Because somebody might not like that, they're asking questions when they know their organization as well as they know it, and they're saying this will never work for us, but I don't want to say anything.
I think it takes us exactly to the provocative question that you and people of Ron Purser, for example, are asking. These narratives of command control have become so commonplace that we do not question them. This cost-cutting exercise, idiocy or foolishness of going round and round in cost-cutting exercises, hardly anyone is questioning it anymore. Deming said this 40 years ago, that cost-cutting is nonsense and counterproductive, bogus. and that it cannot work, but we're still doing it, and it has become so commonplace that we take it for granted. So we have, again, the philosophical, we have to work on philosophy with managers, maybe systemic insight.
maybe so. Although there's tremendous pressure on leaders, from their boards and from their shareholders to cut costs, to always be trying to improve the, EBITDA, and labor is one of those things that's a huge expense. And so whenever we can, so if I were privately advising, leaders in this day and age about how to keep their jobs, I would say hire a lot of people that you're going to let go a year from now, because you'll need to do that. And if you just hire a lot more than you need, then you'll have people that you can get rid of and you can still operate, because you're going to have to let people go. So just know that, and be prepared for it, because the pressure is immense. I mean, it really is. I don't admire being in that role. The pressures that people endure. I mean, a lot of times, when they say, "Could you please close the door and have a conversation?" It's about, there are so many things I'm being forced to do that I don't want to do, that I have to ask myself, do I want to keep this job? No, because I know, to your point, Niels, I know this is not the right thing to do. And yet, the pressure is there to do it. And what can I?
Yeah, I think the market pressures are immense, and in command and control, you cannot really solve the problems. You can fix, but you cannot solve. So, as I like to say, command and control organizations, they do not produce any winners, not even at the top. They only produce losers. Everybody's a loser. I think a little earlier, you talked about the authority, or we talked about the authority at the top. I think that has even changed a little bit. One of the latest trends that I think, or we think we are observing, is that authority has vanished. If you ask a CEO, can we do it? That CEO would probably say, I cannot even do this organization development stuff, transformation stuff, because I'm not sure if I have the authority anymore. The authority is
that's a great point. Yeah, in command and control, we don't have authority. That's a great paradox.
Nobody has balls anymore. The balls are we are all losers. We are all followers and losers, and of course diminished. It's like in fascism. In the long term, it only creates terror and hopelessness, organized hopelessness.
Yeah, but this what we hear, at least, about this generation, is they're okay with that because they don't have the commitment to an organization long term. And I'll just be in this role for a while, and they'll pay me well, and then I'll move on, because
the job hopping alternative, the nomad CEO existence is looming.
Yeah.
No,
maybe.
Let's not do that. Let's transform organizations.
Let's transform them. Make everybody a winner. I like that. I like that option. Door number 2. Let's go for door number 2.
Let's play together, right?
Yeah, let's play together.
Bill, I think there's no way to finish this.
No, there isn't. But I noticed that we've been talking for a while.
It has been a wonderful conversation. Now, this episode has already taken more than 80 minutes. Maybe if you like, Bill, we would love to have another conversation with you at some point. Not next week.
Let's schedule that down the road.
Ryan,
give people time to digest this one.
And final words right now, Bill, stuff that you would like to digest?
Well, I don't have answers to all of this. That's why I keep working and trying to figure out the best way to find answers. But I love that you guys are doing this and trying to help the world learn how to operate differently. And if there are people out there who listen to us and having this conversation, who have ideas about how to move this forward, or create institutions, as you suggested, or do other things, great. Let's hear those and act on them together. That's what I would love to see come out of this. So thank you for continuing your mission.
Yeah, thank you for your marvelous work so far.
Thank you.
I love it all.
Thank you.
Ryan, final words for today?
Well, it's been a great experience being the bass player to those of you playing the 2 lead instruments here. I'm happy to hear it and take a little bit of a solo, and just there's so many things that came up in terms of what you said and what we could do and what becomes possible of again how we as consultants speak to those and in that mythical thing we call authority, right? So yeah, the final words is just, it's been a great time, and I'm looking forward to part 2.
Yes.
All right. Take care, folks.
See you
All right,
soon.
see you guys.
Stay on a little bit, Bill. He's gone. Okay.
Okay, well, I'll let you stay on and we'll talk in later. So, everybody, thank you so much for hanging with us. And it's been a mammoth session, if you will say. And to Bill and Niels always has been wonderful. Thank you for the precious gift of your time and attention. And of course, be more beta.